All right, y'all gather around. Tonight I have some words of wisdom. Hopefully y'all listen and learn. It's another tale about respecting nature and doing what you know is right versus wrong. Tonight we'll hear a story about what happened when one group of campers, very much like us, chose to ignore doing what was right because they were in a hurry. Y'all pay attention now. The crackling fire was the only source of light. John, Mary, and David huddled closer, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They were deep in the forest, miles from civilization. A chorus of crickets provided a constant background hum to their peaceful evening. John was sharing a spooky story, his voice low and raspy. Mary shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. David chuckled, throwing another log onto the fire, sparks flying up into the darkness. Suddenly, a twig snapped. They all froze, listening intently. The laughter followed, a deep, throaty sound that echoed through the trees. It was ominous and sent a shiver up each of their spines. The laughter sounded loud and close by. John grabbed his flashlight, its beam dancing through the trees. "Hello? Is someone out there?" John asked, but there was no response. Determined to find the source of this eerie laughter, they began to search, hearts pounding, but found nothing. The laughter stopped as quickly as it had started. The chirping crickets and the crackling fire were again the only sounds on the night air. It was almost as if the laughter had never happened. Almost. The next day, they tried to shake off the unease and go about with their plans. They cooked up a quick breakfast on the fire and then grabbed their gear for a nice hike and maybe some fishing. They ventured deeper into the woods, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. But the memory of that ominous laughter from the night before hung over them like a shroud. It had changed their perspectives. The forest seemed different now, darker. The rustling leaves sounded like whispers. Each fallen log resembled a hidden creature. They agreed to call off the fishing. That could wait for tomorrow. Instead, they returned to the campsite as the sun began to set. Deep down, none of them wanted to be out in the deep woods once the darkness set in, just in case that prankster with the laugh came back. It looked like a bomb had gone off at the camp. Tents were collapsed and damaged. Their cooler, which had their ice and drinking water, had been dumped onto the campfire, soaking it. A strange feeling of being watched crept over them. John found his backpack ripped open, the contents scattered. Mary's pack had been left on a chair just outside her tent, but was nowhere to be seen. Their camp chairs and tables had been tossed outside of camp. What was left of their supplies was now scattered. As the final rays of sunlight were overtaken by darkness, the reality of their situation struck them. They'd been so caught up in looking at the destruction at the camp, the time slipped away from them. They didn't have a campfire, and with the darkness setting in, they no longer had time to go gather firewood. Their tents had been destroyed. Before anyone could speak, the laughter returned. Again it was dark and ominous, like something evil just waiting for an opportunity to pounce on its prey. "Hurry, let's just run back to the car," John exclaimed. But Mary had the map tucked safely away in her pack, the same pack that was now missing. The car was parked a couple miles away in a clearing off the road. Without the map, and with whatever it was out there in the darkness, the likelihood of finding their way to the car in the darkness did not seem very good. They were going to have to survive the night. The campers huddled together for security and warmth, their backs to the fire pit, though it was still drenched along with the remaining firewood. Fear was a living thing now, coiling around them, squeezing the air from their lungs. The laughter continued to come and go, closer this time, mocking them. John reached for his flashlight that he'd left just outside his tent, but the batteries had been removed. Mary went for her flashlight, but remembered it too was in her pack, which was missing. They were plunged into absolute darkness, the fire long extinguished. Something large moved in the woods around them. Twigs snapped, leaves crunched. The laughter seemed to come in close, but then go back out to a distance where it was still audible, but was obviously further away. How was it moving so fast? They stood in stunned silence, taking in the scene. This was no animal. Someone was out there. Someone who had been watching them, tormenting them. But why? David remembered he had his lighter in his pocket. Though he had stopped smoking a few months ago, the habit of carrying his lighter had proven much harder to break. He used the light of the flame to gather up anything he could find to start a new fire. Dry twigs, leaves, bark. He even grabbed a shirt that he tied around his waist during the hike. He prepared a makeshift fire pit to contain the fire to where it would help illuminate the immediate area around the campsite. The laughter continued as the small blaze from their fire began to grow. Even when the sounds came from what seemed to be right in front of them, they still couldn't see anything or anyone, even with the bit of illumination from the small fire in the darkness. The torment continued all night, but the campers managed to keep their small fire burning. They never saw anything. Perhaps that was lucky. Nothing ever got close enough to them to be seen, but the relentless onslaught of the movement and the laughter drove them to the point of panic. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of torment, the sun's rays began to penetrate the darkness. The laughter stopped. The sunrise returned peace and tranquility to the woods. John and David seized the opportunity and went to the edges of the camp, determined to see who their tormentors were. Once again, they found nothing. Mary joined them, and they checked the entire perimeter of the campsite, and even into the edges of the woods, the exact areas where they had been hearing the laughter for hours, but there were no signs of anything or anyone. Enough was enough. The campers decided to get their stuff and get out. Now that the sun was up, they could find their car, even without the map. As they walked back into camp, they were again greeted with an eerie surprise. There in the spot where they had huddled all night now stood a pile of what appeared to be earthen clumps of dirt or clay. The campers looked at one another. "Where did that come from? We were just here," Mary exclaimed. Her voice trembled with the ever-growing stress of the situation. David approached the pile and started digging to see what was at the bottom. As he got to the bottom, he saw it clearly. It was the map that had been in Mary's pack. The campers gathered their belongings and hurried back through the woods in the direction of the car. Mary referred to the reacquired map to make sure they didn't have any wrong turns. They came to a clearing, and there stood a welcome sight: their car. As they rounded the front of the car, a new image invoked fear into their hearts. Another pile of clumps, this one considerably larger than the last. It obstructed the driver's side door, so would have to be dealt with. "How did that get there? How could anyone have known this was our car?" John asked as he approached the pile. Mary and David looked on with concern as John got to the bottom of the larger pile. They shared a collective gasp as John picked up what had been buried. It was a bag of trash. But not just any trash, this was their trash from the drive-in days ago. The realization hit them like a physical blow. On the drive-in a couple days ago, they were hungry, so stopped a few towns back and picked up some burgers and fries. David had wanted to dine in, but John and Mary both insisted to get the order to go as the daylight was running out. They still needed to drive a ways, then hike to the campsite, and then set up camp. So eating from the road would save them valuable time. They all ate in the car, and when everyone had finished, they didn't want to keep smelling the trash. John didn't want a ticket for littering, so checked the surroundings. It was a long, straight road, no other cars in sight. He threw the bag of trash out of the window, and they sped away, eager to begin their weekend camping trip. "How could anyone have seen us dump this? There was nobody around," John commented. Just then, the laughing started up again, seemingly coming from multiple directions. Mary screamed with fear, and David yelled for everyone to get into the car. The campers jumped into the car and sped away without looking back. Days later, the campers were back in the safety and comfort of their homes. John went out to his car to finally clear the remaining gear from the trip. As he opened the back door, there sitting in the rear floorboard behind the driver's seat was a single clump of the same earthen material from the piles back in the woods. John let out a loud holler from the unexpected scare. He looked around, but there was nothing else unexpected in or around his driveway. He grabbed the clump and noticed what appeared to be a corner of a piece of paper coming from within the mass. He crumbled away the dirt and clay to reveal a small piece of paper. Scrawled across the paper in a childish hand was a single sentence: "You left your trash." John called David, who rode in the back seat on the ride home, and asked if the clump had been there during the drive. "No," David stated calmly. "That floorboard behind your seat was the spot where my pack was. There's no way that clump could have been there when we were driving back." They conferenced in Mary, but neither Mary nor David had experienced any more ominous events since leaving the woods. Could the tormentor have followed them back and put that clump into John's car while it was parked right outside in his driveway? And how could he have gotten in? There were no signs of forced entry into the car. With a deep sigh, David made a comment that all of this seems to have been because of that stupid bag of trash. So, campers, what do you think is the moral of this story? I mean, it all started from a simple act of thoughtlessness. But seemingly, in the eyes of someone, or something, that simple act was a grave offense. The three friends lost touch over the weeks to come and never spoke again. On the bright side, none of them ever littered again either. So remember to always properly dispose of your trash. When you're in nature, leave it the way you found it. And lastly, know that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. Now, who wants to roast some marshmallows?